Hello everyone, good afternoon. It's Rachel Lee here in my backyard. I'm giving my puppy some much needed mental health space today. Happy day 18th of EDS Awareness Month and Autism Awareness Month. We have been combining the two things on the page. I've had some awesome people jump in to share throughout the month on EDS and autism. And today's theme for awareness is mental health. So this is going to be video 1 of 2, and I'm going to start with mental health in autism. A lot of the standard discussions around mental health and autism focus on sensory input, navigating, having accommodations for sensory stimuli, for over input. They might focus a bit on masking is a big topic, the burden of masking constantly in public, and those are big picture, broad spectrum, standard things that many people talk about and many people have addressed. So I want to go into a little more micro detail on a couple of things that I don't think people consider. Um, and so we're going to go really, really specific here for a second. I talk a lot about the body language within autistic culture and autistic communication. It's really one of the best metaphors, and I really think it's quite literal, is that we do have our own language. The way that our hypersensory systems, and your sensory system is key to language formation and language development throughout your life, how you perceive the world. Someone who's blind or deaf, someone with different limbs, different limb variations, genetically or otherwise, they will use language differently if they grew up with those conditions. And autism is no different. We use language in a fundamentally different way. And that includes the way that we do or do not process nonverbal communication with other people or our own nonverbal communication. So fundamental baseline, and if you've seen any of my other things, you've heard this a lot, is that most non-autistic people do not consider their body language and what it means. They're not thinking about it as much. And initially we aren't either. It can just become very helpful to consider it more actively because subconsciously within our peripheral and sympathetic nervous systems, we are noticing way more than anyone else has to cope with in an exchange, in a communication exchange. And so this is underlying the mental health issues that you hear talked about around the physical health, around different elements of masking. It kind of boils down to this baseline of, well, how do you care for yourself and the potential of life to bring about depression, anxiety? How do you deal with being autistic and experiencing something that's caused PTSD or CPTSD? Rooting for the DSM-5 to come up with some better trauma diagnostic criteria for children with these issues. This is kind of underpinning most of this because it not only determines how we will behave because of trauma, health issues, and mental health, mental health issues that people can develop, like depression and anxiety. It not only determines how we behave when those things affect us, but it has a huge impact on how other people perceive that behavior because the behavior is going to be different, and what helps us heal and recover or continue life within those things. And it's the core of a lot of very deep misunderstandings that a lot of autistic people perpetuate, actually. So I'm not just critiquing y'all non-autistic neurotypical, like, oh, you just miss us all the time, and I'm not complaining about that. A number of autistic people also misunderstand this because you've been taught certain expectations about language and psychology without coming at it from the core of just being a differently developed human being on a number of levels. So one of the features of this is threat signaling, threat response, and threat perception. In ADHD, there is a feature of executive functioning that becomes dysfunctional around perceived rejection. It's called rejection sensitive dysphoria. The person with ADHD can very easily misread a situation and assume, because their whole body feels this. It's not a mental thing they just thought through and came to the wrong conclusion. It's a full body reaction or response to specific things, usually body language, usually nonverbal body language, but also verbal, and it's a sense of rejection. This sense of rejection is painful. They can feel like they're being punched or hit when they feel this. And to them, it's just normal. And they will even begin to process that another person that they're spending a lot of time with, a close friend, a spouse, they will begin to process that maybe that other person is doing it on purpose or just isn't listening to them and acknowledging what they're experiencing. But this baseline of processing in ADHD is a dysphoria. It is very often not actually happening. And that's a huge hurdle. We could do a whole series just on RSD. It's been done. Google it. There's great information out there on ADHD websites, Adaptive, and other resources for that type of the mental health. But what's relevant about that, what's relevant about rejection-sensitive dysphoria is that the deep level of misreading of body language that's observed gets turned into a sense of being intentionally caused pain. And I want to highlight this because a lot of us on the neurodivergent spectrum are also ADHD, but not all. And autistic people very easily get lumped into the same category, that in terms of our threat processing and threat responses, we have a dysphoria. This is not true. It's fundamentally not true. And those with the unique phenotype that gets described as autism ADHD, it's actually its own thing. It's not the two conditions combined. They can experience both the legitimate threat responses and evaluations and the RSD. So that's a challenge as well. So just in the autism category, the perception of threat is usually highly accurate. It is not a dysphoria. We are perceiving real things, usually before anyone else can, that can be threatening. And we do this very, very quickly and often with a very heightened level of sensory input. And so during development, during childhood, if we do not have support to begin to, like every other area of hypersensitive emotions, we feel more than other people do, not less. If we don't have support to learn to accurately process those threat responses, it can lead to a lot of really challenging issues, really depression, anxiety, a heightened level of social anxiety and responses that are perceived as aggression, are perceived very negatively by other people in general as a result. But it's not dysphoric. It's not delusional. If you sit down with the autistic person who you have noticed as having a threat response to something and give them a genuine ear, you will, 100% of the time, find that the thing that they perceived and then reacted to was indeed, in some measure, a threat. Now, we all know, I hope, as you're watching, that threat can also occur on a spectrum, right? Like, oh, the spider running toward me versus the tsunami. That's different levels of threat. Just like there's different levels of affection, there's different levels of joy, there's different levels of satisfaction. This is common for human beings in general to face and to go through, okay? And most non-autistic people generally do not have to study their threat responses. Your bodies simply don't have enough input to make it necessary unless you're in more considerable severe circumstances like psychological threat, a really intense psychological threat, like intentional narcissistic manipulation, physical beatings, bullying, violence in some way or another, being chased by a bear. They don't have to process and train threat responses until those things happen. Not us. Nope. We need a little bit more. Our body's fight flight response systems, like everything else, are hypersensitive. And it does us a great disservice when those are assumed to be dysphoric, rather than literal and legitimate. That causes more anxiety and depression and shutdown for an autistic person, and for our relationship processing with someone else. When someone else treats us as though our threat responses are dysphoria, there is an instant shutdown, disconnect, a defensive, I'm not going to engage with you. I don't want to engage with you. You are fundamentally not willing to see or feel my world and who I am. So go away. There's kinder ways to say that, but they're usually not well received either. That's instantly perceived as a rejection of the other person, which then just manipulates the whole thing, and it explodes. It's not great when that autistic self-defense is met with more emotional immaturity. And that affects our mental health. There is a difference between threat and threat response. It's a very subtle difference. It's a very nuanced difference. And I could talk about that for a long time too. But there are things that are threatening to the system. And in autism, that includes strong smells and bright lights. It includes people who are not regulating their emotions well, or having very strong emotions and not communicating how we're supposed to connect with them or how they want us. I'm going to say that. Not how, but how they want us, because we really want to help other people and we want to adapt to them. That's where our masking comes from. If you haven't figured that piece out yet or ever heard that before, a huge amount of autistic masking is not negative the way you've heard it presented and talked about. It's actually a very positive, fundamental instinctual response that all humans can exhibit, where you intentionally adjust yourself to help another person. And autistic people really want to do this for others. We really want other people to feel happy and to feel safe around us. That's a fundamental core aspect of who we are, on a very deep level. And so we intentionally are open to masking things to help someone else. But when they're having really strong emotions or really strong reactions, like a rejection sensitive dysphoric reaction to us, and they don't say, hey, I'm just having a reaction, give me a second to regulate, or they don't say, I'm sorry, this isn't about you, give me a moment, well, lots of other things happen that are very painful and feel threatening to us. That is different from a threat response. They can parallel, but they're different. A threat response is the individual's unique physiological, mental, emotional reaction to a threat. And this varies drastically from person to person. There's lots of similarities, but the profile of threat responses are based on your experience as a human being, on what you've been through. So, for example, I can use myself, I'm the best example, and then I'm not talking about anyone else. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse as a child by a family member. And among other things, in the communication of that, in the experience of having a really intense chronic, my physiology is different, and illness things that were not being addressed, that were condemned, dismissed, put aside, or I was just expected to function in spite of them. You combine all of these different things and you could easily diagnose multiple forms of PTSD, especially for me between the ages of 9 and 17, 18. A couple key changes happened around age 18 where I was finally able to go, oh, hey, maybe this isn't all my fault. And if I start caring for myself, things could be different. So about in that age range, there were what people call behavioral challenges, but they're not dysphoric, they're communicative. I was in physical pain, I was in emotional pain, and struggling deeply to cope with social environmental factors because my body's trained response to threatening situations with other people developed in a certain way because of that childhood trauma. And so a lot of people don't differentiate either. Threat and threat response are different. So is the trauma and the trauma response. So in autism, when you have autism and I don't believe I have PTSD anymore, and I've had that medically confirmed for years now, just because I was curious and did the evaluation like, hey, what is this? It's, now there's lingering pieces of it, okay? Your traumas, there's a lot of those experiences that stay with you and will always affect you. It doesn't mean, oh, somehow, cured and there's never any problem because something happened to you that was significant in identity forming. But what I mean is, I no longer have, I can control, given the opportunity by another person, if it's in a social interaction, I no longer lose control to PTSD triggers. I have had situations where another person did not recognize my grounding activities, and then and I was not able to use the tools I have to regulate, and that resulted in PTSD meltdowns. But in my own bubble, I have a set of tools for grounding and recovery that I can use to engage. I go flat. I become calm. My body language changes, my tone of voice changes, and I can use a set of mental exercises and physical exercises and create enough space to be in control of a PTSD trigger. And the effect of that and training my body into that is that I don't have them anymore. Really, not really. Someone could still cause one, but fortunately that doesn't happen as much anymore either. That's PTSD. Now, autistic meltdowns are different. They're very different, and they can also be triggered by other people. And we have to build a set of tools to avoid them. What they call an autistic meltdown, like a PTSD flashback, you're not in control during those times. But while a PTSD trigger is fear-based, is threat-based via the fear pathway, and a set of trained responses kick in, an autistic meltdown is fear-based due to sensory environment overwhelm. And the body languages that are exhibited, either shutting down, going nonverbal, yelling, trying to control noise, there's a whole set of things that people don't see are different from PTSD, and with the goal of trying to become grounded, trying to calm down. And the like compression, inner compression to help feel stable, to have the world stop spinning. It is not the same as a PTSD pathway trigger, but they are relevant when they co-occur in the same person. Because if the individual doesn't know that they're two different things and struggling with two different things, then they may try to use the tools for coping with one to try to cope with the other, or they may, in an attempt to explain to other people their behavior, may address it as an autism thing when actually it was a PTSD thing, or vice versa, which would be very confusing to other people. So how does this play into mental health? Well, we want to be connected to others and be around others. And in the PTSD trauma side, the threats that can come at us lead to a real fear that another person may not respect the mental health boundaries, the grounding tools, the things that I use to protect myself and other people from a flashback, and they perceive those as rejection, or they perceive those as aggressive. They perceive those, so like me, when I am feeling a threat, to allow time for processing that threat, because it's not a bear running at me or a guy with a weapon of some kind, to process the threat and choose what to do about it, because we want to stay in control, my body stiffens. I get very tense. I begin to speak in more clipped tones, and getting very straight and to the point about something. I don't beat around the bush. It's not that I can't perceive a kinder tone or a more gentle this or that. I'm feeling threatened and beginning to stop, and so I would like this engagement or interaction to stop so I can go get out of the threatening situation. And that gets misunderstood, at least for me, that gets drastically misunderstood. Other people can perceive it, especially other people with ADD or ADHD, they perceive that as rejection from much personal experience. It can be perceived as anger. And because of my trauma history, and this isn't waving my own flag, I just happen to know that very few sexual abuse victims fight back against their abusers. And a unique part of my story is that I fought back. And so anger for me is almost a righteous, sacred thing. And I've spent much of my life seeking and pursuing the beauty of anger and the necessity of anger without hurting others. And I raise my children with that same principle, that this is a part of how we emotionally process and should not be demonized. Now, we have immaturity and you've got reactions and a whole bunch of things. I'm not saying you get to use your anger however you want. I'm saying that in my story, it is deeply, deeply emotionally eviscerating when someone misinterprets my attempt to ground and process a threat as irrational anger or instability. It's a complete misperception. And if they have emotional immaturity, then they're going to take that rejection and fly off the handle in a whole bunch of other ways. And that's tough to deal with when you're in a situation where you're facing a PTSD trigger and trying to ground yourself. It can feel emotionally abusive much of the time. And I'm not just throwing that out there. I've processed that, studied it, and discussed it with a lot of different people for years now. It feels emotionally abusive as the autistic person because our effort to regulate, our effort to maintain peace in the conversation and to take responsibility for our own emotions gets completely ignored. And then we are asked or demanded to place the other person's overblown, misconceived, irrational emotions as above ours. That comes across as manipulative and creates a very significant mental health struggle with people who do that. On the autism side, in an autism sensory trigger, let's also put it in the context of a relational exchange, not just environmental threats like bright light. In a relational exchange, this looks very different. There is a body language and a tone of voice where we are so in tune, looking to help the other person, to connect with them, that we can perceive when that other person maybe becomes agitated or feels hurt or feels put out in some way. And there's a series of questions. Did we cause this? What do we do if we caused it? How do we approach the next step? How are you feeling? What do you do? In safe relationships with reciprocal mental emotional needs, where another person has really gotten to know us, this can be a really beautiful process. I do this with my kids all the time. It's a co-regulation where there's a possibility of a misunderstanding in a verbal exchange, and it looks from the outside maybe like it takes a lot of effort. Like, why did you just stop and talk about the tone of voice of one word you said in a sentence? Well, I don't have to do that as much anymore, especially as they get older, because they're getting so good at it. But it's actually very important, because in the way things are phrased and worded, we are processing so much more on the spectrum of meaning than other people. It's why I believe many of us are nonverbal or struggle with nonverbal episodes. I am not really loquacious because I'm less autistic. It's part of my defense mechanisms as a child, because of the constant demand as a child to figure out how to say things the right way in order to be heard and to fight back in order to survive in very real, very threatening circumstances. I began to practice how to speak. I didn't always pick the best coaches, but there was an intention there. So, in an autistic need for grounding in a verbal exchange with another person, it is very important for our grounding to not be overwhelmed, to not have a meltdown triggered in a communication exchange, that we be allowed to ask questions. What did you mean by that? But we need to usually be more specific. We have to be able to give context, such as, I heard you say this, and it sounded very X, Y, or Z. It sounded very angry. It sounded very hurt. We have to put a word to it. Not because we're trying to make you think you sounded that way, but because it did to us, and we're acknowledging the question. This is what people miss, and this is the mental health struggle. That when we ask these questions to clarify a conversation, the other person, neurodivergent and neurotypical, tend to assume that we are trying to tell them what they were thinking and feeling. Never. Never. If we're going to do that, we say, we we're very direct with it. And we really, I've only run into a couple people that really do that, and it's a defense mechanism related to PTSD, not autism. So what we're doing is we are accepting responsibility for our part of the conversation, for our ability to misread, which isn't, that's a misnomer. We don't misread the body language. You probably did communicate. If it sounded angry to us, you probably communicated something with a bit of anger. You just didn't notice it. So it seems like we're amplifying an emotion you didn't have. That's usually not what happens. I spent a couple of years, I still do it a lot of the times, but I spent a few years interacting with a few trusted people, but also some strangers, where I would get into these conversations and ask them these things and study their responses and engage them to respond back to me about this type of, about this misperception. And usually when they stop and think, they go, oh yeah, when I was talking about this, I remembered this, and what you said actually made me remember this thing from my childhood, or this thing that happened on Monday with my boss, and I was angry. It's not a dysphoria. To just circle back to that. It's not a dysphoria. We usually have exactly identified something you were feeling, and for some reason, maybe how you said it, maybe how we heard it as unique individuals, it seemed like that particular emotion was the strongest one, and we are asking you about it to clarify the situation, not to make you feel responsible for something, or to convince you that you think or feel things you don't. No, that's called narcissism and sociopathic manipulation. Not autism. Not us. Actually, autistic. Not narcissistic. You beep. We're not. We're trying to clarify the situation. And I emphasize that because I've also lived around and helped other people with some very narcissistic individuals. And they will also ask contextual questions, but their motivation is very different. So the question might sound the same. What do you mean by that? Or the statement, that sounded angry, why are you upset? Could sound the same. But what the narcissist will do with that is use it to condemn you and shame you intentionally. The autistic person is looking to have their perception validated. Like, are you actually feeling that way? Or are you lying to me about it? Because it seems like you're actually feeling that way. Have you thought about it? I'm feeling this. Is it all just me? Give me some data. Give me some information. And the motivation is not to manipulate the other person or to shame them for our own, because we don't get pleasure from that. And that's maybe the distinguishing feature. It does not make us happy for other people to be in pain. Guys, we feel too much pain. We don't want to feel more of it on purpose. So that's not a thing. It's just not. But so when that other person hears these questions or hears our statements, we're trying to build context. We're trying to build, the metaphor I like is to find where I am in the room. In a given room, there are couches, chairs, dishes, other people. There's all these sorts of things that can change or shape the flow of a conversation and a relationship. And in a general conversation, I pick up very quickly when there are other things in the room that I can't see. And I want to know what they are. I need to know what they are a lot of the time. Once I get to know someone, I get to know the rooms they usually are in. I get to know how they function, how they think. And I don't have to ask those questions as often because I know there's a comfy chair over there and a fireplace over there, metaphorically, for that person. And I've learned it. I don't need to learn it again. But it's a very individual process with one person at a time. Or groups of people with similar demographic features. And so that is autistic, communicative, meltdown potential processes, is that when we begin to ask these questions in context, they're very severely misread. Other people can react to them quite terribly, especially if they've also been through trauma. One of my first lessons in psychology was that hurt people hurt other people. And this is one of those examples that for an autistic person, this happens for some of us almost daily, where a simple desire to understand more of the person we're talking to, or for them to understand us because they're not asking, leads to reactions in them where they feel rejected and they feel, or a whole slew of other things that are dysphoric, that are not what's actually happening in the conversation for us. And these types of interactions are crucial for sorting out the challenge of autism and PTSD combinations and our mental health. To preserve our mental health, we often have to limit interactions with these people. We have to shut down because they don't want to see the world how we do at a level that is akin to what's a good example of what this feels like for an autistic person? It's like someone, if I have to pair it emotionally, this might seem drastic for some of you, but this is what I think of. It's like someone coming to you and saying, "Hey, I'm being abused. Please help me," and they don't. And they say, "It's just how you're perceiving things." That is the level of rejection that, the emotional level of rejection that impacts us when someone that we love or someone who's supposed to be in a closer relationship treats us that way and rejects us in that way. And that's very difficult. It's a little bit easier with strangers. A stranger, it's just mostly frustrating and kind of angering in healthy ways, like, oh my gosh, why does he keep thinking this or saying this? I'm just trying to get the project done. Ah, come on, Autistic people, take some more time to think about your own communication. It would be really helpful for the rest of us. So it's a little easier with strangers. It's very cutting when it's people that we've allowed into our lives that we've tried to share life with do that to us. And I word it that way specifically because it's being done to us. It will never beat around the bush about that. It's a complete and utter fundamental misunderstanding of autistic processing, of autistic threat responses, autistic meltdowns, potentially even overlapping with PTSD. They're just wrong. And the science shows that, and the communication shows that, and simple observation shows that. Because when you actually observe this happening in healthy ways, without rejection-sensitive dysphoria, without the other person's trauma responses muddling the picture, when you just take time to go, oh, I think I sounded stressed because of this thing over here. It wasn't you. Let's continue talking. Or vice versa. When we say something and the other person gets triggered by it and doesn't ask us questions, that's the other one. It goes both ways. We want to be asked questions. And some of the most painful times in my life are when I find out that I had an exchange with someone. This also doesn't happen really much anymore, but especially through high school, where I'd find out that I had an exchange with someone and they were really hurt by it. And I was like, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you ask me? That's not what I meant. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And as much as I can be sorry for accidentally doing, let me explain it. Very hurt people and very traumatized people, as all of us are hurt in some way, won't bring up pain right away. When someone has hurt us, I think what I see other people do is they assume it was on purpose. I don't fundamentally. I fundamentally assume that it was an accident, and I ask people, did you mean that? All the time. But a lot of people don't. And so that's very challenging for our mental health, is that we're not given the opportunity to rephrase something or reword something. For example, let's say that something in a communication exchange triggered a PTSD threat response. I've gotten more rigid. I've gotten more monotone. I'm guarding and looking in my mind for something like a joy memory or some good music to process the threat and handle it. And someone asks me a question. It does not matter how much I love you or how kind I want to be. You are going to get a response that's probably a little sharp and a little direct. It has nothing to do with you. Not a thing. It was when you asked your question. And if that person then assumes that the sharp, clipped voice, no one wants to be misunderstood. So just like I'm going to ask questions about what someone else means, ask me. All of my wonderful close friends, the many women, a couple guys I've bonded with over the years, my children, we've built up a lot of these communication patterns. It's been pivotal to being able to articulate this and express all of these things. We just don't do this with each other. It's just not a problem. It's not an issue. Because they've learned my body language. And they don't get rejected by it. Because it's not meant to be the rejection. What I'm doing is grounding in a threat response to even it out and to stay in control. It has nothing to do with the rejection or acceptance of anyone else. It's very much me taking responsibility for myself. And it's really sad, I think, when other people can't give autistic people in their lives room to ever heal from trauma and assume that they will never make any progress or never have any growth or ability to have self-responsibility. Guys, it is not a feature of autism that you're constantly out of control. We have an incredible capacity to learn when provided with the right environment and the opportunity and people, and we love to learn other people. So in the last 5 minutes of this video, let's talk about autistic people. What can you do? I started it a little bit ago, and I'm going to just summarize it in now. We have to distance ourselves from some of those people. And it really sucks because, especially if they're family members, they are going to totally misread it. But guys, they've been misreading it the whole time anyway. Now they think you're rejecting you and cutting you off. They've been assuming that for years. And they were wrong the whole time, and you kept trying. And now you're finally ready to just be like, okay, fine. Let's be done. Why continue? Why continue? And then this kind of balls in their court. They can either learn about this or not. And I'm not just being needlessly blasé about that, but I want to communicate to my autistic brothers and sisters that that is often a need and a boundary that we have. Because when we have had to engage with family, friends, coworkers who continuously and ritually reject who we are by refusing to consider other explanations for our body language and for our expression and for our self-control and our management, you can't stay around those people and still be a healthy person. It's not possible. Limited interactions maybe, but if there aren't boundaries, then your masking is going to go into overdrive because you're going to agree with them. You're going to convince yourself that you are the problem just to stay around them. And that's going to be very detrimental to you. You can study more about communication interactions with other people, about your own threat response triggers, and begin to build tools for grounding and regulating those. Certain kinds of touch, weighted blankets, types of music, mental processes, things you do in your body, breathing techniques, all these things that can connect with our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system to help coordinate and to regulate are very, very important and very, very good. And you do need to be practicing those with all that you've got. When you also are ADHD, you have to study and understand rejection-sensitive dysphoria and take responsibility for it. You might not be able to stop your reaction, but if you can explain it to someone, that's at least the first step to what's happening next. That's at least the first step to your being able to gain more nuanced communication with people. And for those who are just ADHD, y'all have to study that one too. There's other features, but if you let that one drive your maturity, also if you're ADHD with trauma and the way that impacts your language and your memory, you have to take responsibility for that and get someone in your life, get therapists, get people who will treat you honestly and not just let you continue the immature emotional relationship cycles of blaming other people for hurting you, because it is a dysphoria and you can't tell without practice. I have a very positive view of those things, and I work with this with my daughter a lot. I can always tell in her RSD moments, I can see clearly with her where the rejection came from. And so I step in with her as she's younger and say, okay, Gloria, I think you misunderstood this. So I want to repeat it again. I am not rejecting you, but I have to correct this. I am not rejecting you, and we need to do this. And I don't condemn her emotions. I don't make her feel bad for struggling. I try to join with her and help carry the weight and supply more love and more affection to compensate for the attachment pain of the RSD. If you did not have this as a child, you need to get it from safe individuals who are able to join with you, but also do not give in to your dysphoria perceptions as real things. So look for safe people who will also hold you accountable in your processing and in your language for that. Autistics, wherever you guys are at on the spectrum and however you are feeling about those things, you're amazing. You're amazing people. You've probably had trauma in your life. You probably have chronic health issues that we haven't had a chance to talk about in this video that are also affecting all of your communication, your trauma recovery, your desire to be and connect and to be seen and to be loved. And maybe no one in your life is considering those things. Maybe they've left you because they couldn't consider those things. I would love to give you a hug. I'd love to tell you that it's going to be okay, that you can still find joy, that you can still recover, that you can still be loved. So take responsibility for what you can actually take responsibility for. Heal from trauma so that you can separate those two parts of you when you need to, so that you can develop stronger mental and emotional skills. Study communication. Observe how people react and respond, because it will give you more sense of control. And I love that word for us, even though it can get abused and misused by other pathologies and issues. I love the sense, or just culturally, it's negative. You're just trying to be in control. No. In an autistic person, we crave a particular sense of order to things, so that each thing has a purpose for its existence and its placement. The Japanese word that I love for this is kanso. Kanso is it's how you arrange things within your home, your office, your space, but each thing has a particular purpose. And the purpose is not just an aesthetic, but it can be. In our relationships, we crave kanso. We crave an order to them. And randomness isn't the antithesis of it. No, we crave a purposefulness to it, so that it can be wholehearted, so that we can be all of ourselves in a moment, in a relationship, not just the only part the other person will accept. And so I use the word control in that sense. Study communication, study emotions, learn about them, learn about other people. Don't just be angry that they don't get you, even though you might have a right to be. I don't know your story. You have a right to feel hurt, to feel sad, and to grieve. You do. And the more knowledge you gain, the more control you can have, if not over the relationships that have hurt you, over the new ones you build into your life to move forward. And that is key to autistic mental health. We want so badly to fix things and to adjust and change those past relationships. We want to relieve suffering. It is the most acute kind of torture to learn for me when someone feels hurt by something I did and they've never talked to me about it. And they've never brought it up, and we've never actually been able to address anything, and they've just hidden it. The desire to fix that, to bring it back into order, can be torture when it can't happen. And the best balm I have found, the most soothing thing I've found, is to build new relationships, because then my body's physical experience on a daily basis is one of being respected, loved, one where conflicts resolve quickly, one where there is mutual trust. And so even though other relationships in life can still produce a very unique kind of suffering for us, you can use that studying and that skill to build around yourself so that most of the relationships, so that the majority of your interactions are not suffering. They are joyful, they are whole, they are fulfilling. And if you cannot completely heal and recover from the relational traumas of your past, you will at least be doing more than surviving them. You'll be able to continue in life and grieve them. Thank you guys for sticking around for this very, very important segment. I hope you've had time to consider and think, and that this will be useful in your world.